Simply put, Sabbat is the personification of war. War on antediluvians, war against Gehenna, war against the Camarilla, the Incarnu, and the KG independents. War against witch hunters, werewolves, cowardly anarchs, and the herds of humanity. And for some vampires, even the war on the very sect to which they belong to. Being a vampire in the Sabbat means being a soldier in a holy war against the ancient, cannibalistic monsters who passed on the curse of Caine in the Knights of the Old. Antediluvians and their Camarilla puppets seek to bring the Gehenna onto the world and devour their children. Sabbat vampires do not want to die at the fangs of their malignant progenitors. To the Sabbat, the eternal struggle is a matter of us versus them, and everyone who doesn't belong to the sect is them. Fanatic to the last, Sabbat vampires throw themselves into the fire for their sect, falling on their foes in legions, tearing their enemies apart, just like as a pack of wolves brings down their prey. At least, this is how the vampires of the Sabbat seem to others. The truth is much more complex. They are neither the monstrous savages nor the infernal zealots as others will like to portray them. Having turned their backs on humanity, Sabbat vampires understand that they are damned, creatures of the beast. Rather than bemoan the loss of what they once were, they revel in their monstrosity. They are more than human, cursed for moving beyond the limitations of humanity. And, as always in the case of the damned, Sabbat are vampires first and sect members second. This means that the sect is rife with treachery, rivalry, and outright hostility as any other group of the kindred, a distasteful term of weakness among the sons and daughters of Caine, or as older members of the sect would say, Cainites. The sect is sick, rotting from within, and yet rebelling against its own collapse with a ferocity unmatched by other vampires anywhere. The sect's history prior to the events of the Convention of Thorns is less than certain. There are some disputes within the sect on whether Sabbat existed in the old world, and there are various claims and theories, but one fact remains reliable. The sect rose to prominence after the Anarch Revolt, when the young vampires of clans Lasombra and Tzimisce rose against their antediluvians and the indisputable reign of elders drew to a close, and vampire society changed forever thereafter. Sometime in the 13th and 14th century, Clan Lasombra united against and slew their progenitor. Led by charismatic Cainite named Gratiano, Lasombra anarchs decided that they will no longer be oppressed by their elders, who seemed content with keeping them in internal subservice. Flocking to Gratiano, Assamites and anarchs of all other clans gathered in Sicily, where it was rumored that the mighty Lasombra Antediluvian made his haven. Overwhelmed and unprepared, the haven fell, and Gratiano consumed the ancient's blood, setting the clan free from tyranny. Naturally, the story varies from teller to teller, as time and duplicity have eroded the truth of the affair. By various accounts, the leader of the Anarch band himself, Gratiano, struck the first blow in what would become the most tumultuous period of vampire history ever recorded, with the possible exception of these final nights. Numerous questions arose on what role Gratiano took after the Sabbat rose to power, and how could this rogue anarch and his motley soldiers fell an entire clan of masters of deception. But while those questions were being pondered, somewhere in between the ancients' fall and the eruption of Sabbat, Gratiano and his brood disappeared. Spurred on by the success of the Lasombra, the Tzimisce took to heart and planned to follow suit. The Fiends were, and still are, notoriously fractious family of vampires, characterized by unfathomable dignity on one side and a twisted deviance on the other. The clan literally fell into war within itself. Vampires warred every night throughout the Eastern Europe, where Elder Tzimisce held their lands in fearsome iron grips. In the end, the passion of the young Anarchs won out against the stagnant, crumbling legacies of the Elders. Fiends who have governed their holdings for centuries were hunted and put to death at the fiery brands of the Tzimisce Anarchs. As a side note, Cainite scholars and historians regard this claim as ominous. Why did the fiends not claim their elders' power? Why do they only diablerize vampires of other clans? Of course, Tzimisce remains silent on the matter. Finally, one night in the late 14th century, the fiends managed to unearth the location of their clan's founder, converging on the site a blasted church on a forgotten Tirsa. Tzimisce Anarchs disinterred their ancient and committed diablerie on it, Lugoj, the Bloodbreaker. The leader who had partaken in the Amaranth then sank into torpor, weighted down by the potent blood taken from the veins cursed by the god long before the birth of Christ. None have seen Lugoj since, and tales circulate among younger Sabbat that even in claiming victory of the Elders, still they managed to draw their children down. With the success of the Tzimisce and Lasombra Anarchs, widespread patricide erupted all over Europe. Elders fell in droves, often taking numerous treacherous children with them. Vampire population in Europe dropped, and aided by the potent vampires of the mercenary Assamite clan, the Anarchs left no stone unturned in their war against the hated Elders. Although no other clans managed to achieve the same success over their ancients that the Tzimisce and Lasombra did, it wasn't for the lack of trying. Even the most powerful elders of those dark nights were not safe, and it became obvious that something needed to be done about the rampant chaos that the Anarchs brought with them. Soon after the Anarch Revolt entered its most active phase, mortals observing the chaos and terror around them discovered that monsters loomed in their midst. After a desperate appeal to Rome, the humankind entreated the Pope to turn the Inquisition toward the end of rooting out these devils and heretics. This mission devastated the Cainite community even more than its internal war, as now Cainites had to fear the fires of the Inquisition as well as each other. Finally, everything came to a head as certain powerful elder vampires made a call to all kindred, claiming that they had found an end to the need for such warfare. This written accord, known as the Convention of Thorns, promised to restore order and sanctity to the race of Cainites. Of course, as elders were the creators of this accord, it offered to simply return to the things as they were before. Unfortunately, the Anarchs and Assamites had no choice, as they were trapped between the Inquisition and the Elders. Admitting failure, they succumbed to the will of the assembled Elder, drawing the Anarch movement to a decisive close. Not every Anarch gave up so easily, however. Repentant Anarchs and vast majority of the clan Assamite offered little in the way of remedying the situation that has caused the problem in the first place. Enraged, they burned through the thorns, leaving nothing but a burning, bloodied carcass of the town behind them. The sect that would become the Sabbat had committed itself to its immortal course of action that night. In the half-century to follow, packs of Antitribu plagued the night, ravaging almost everything in their way, and in those 50 years, these rebels organized themselves into a cohesive ideological sect, agreeing on a rough doctrine of cause against the Elders and the Antediluvians. By the mid-16th century, the entity known as the Sabbat had united in righteous opposition to the Camarilla and blind subservice to greater evil. During the late 16th century, the Sabbat found itself in a precarious position. Composed of a few elder Cainites and a vast majority of young vampires, it failed to gain significant advantage over the nascent Camarilla. Bitter war raged between newly formed Sabbat and Camarilla, and the Inquisition continued to claim victims. The lack of ability from both sides to control heads of state, many cities held mixed population of Cainites, and in the end, war was more a nightly litany of guerrilla attacks than the open movements of the battlefield. Unfortunately for the Sabbat, in the end the tide turned in Camarilla's favor. The age of exploration, however, had opened new vistas for humankind and Cainites alike. Large number of Sabbat members were young vampires who sought new opportunities in the Americas, leaving the old world behind and establishing a resounding presence in what would become the United States. The sect flourished for a while, but some factors conspired to keep the Sabbat weak in the old world. Many mortals among the colonists who were victims of religious persecution had true faith. Additionally, without the aid of their elder lairs, young Sabbat had difficulties waging war on elders, and only the presence of the terrible Lupins kept Sabbat from descending into intestine squabbling. Before long, the war that waged in Europe came to the ships into Americas, and few mortal conflicts in the New World existed that did not hide the sinister implications of vampiric conflict. Arguably, the single most crippling characteristic of the Sabbat was its lack of organization. Their embrace of freedom turned against the sect and ended up as the Sabbat Civil War. In the late 18th century, the Lasombra and Tzimisce fell into war against each other over the rapidly depleting resources of the New World. Cities were overpopulated by Cainites, few and far between. While Sabbat was struggling between factors, Camarilla crept into the New World undetected, and by the time Sabbat realized that they were surrounded and overtaken, it was too late. In the brief 30 years, the Sabbat's work had been undone by the very enemies they had fled in the old world. Unwilling to admit defeat, Sabbat turned inward, pledging to fix its rifts and once again turn its attention to the Camarilla and the Ancients. In 1903, after American President Thomas Jefferson obtained all-American territory west of Mississippi River from the French, the Sabbat made an internal accord known as the Purchase Pact. This pact forbade conflict within the sect, and for the first time in the Sabbat history, its members had restriction on doing whatever they wanted, guided by their philosophy of freedom. Unfortunately, the pact came too late, as Camarilla has already taken root in what would become the United States. But Sabbat vampires are survivors, and despite the obstacles placed in their path, they preserved and established strongholds in Canada and Mexico. With their brutal blitzes, waves of vampires took over cities, overtly and covertly, and Camarilla was fenced to its immediate north and south. Sabbat needed only to hold its borders. However, remaining cohesive proved difficult, and old tempers between Lasombra and Tzimisce flared once again. They blame each other for losing the United States, and divided by geography, Sabbat almost destroyed itself in the New World. Fortunately, this secret vampiric conflict remained unnoticed by the Americans due to the events in the European theater. Camarilla assumed influence in numerous Canadian cities, and Mexico was torn apart in the struggle, which resulted in much of its state even to the modern Knights. Finally, convening in New York, which remained the Sabbat's hold against all efforts of the Camarilla, high-ranking Sabbat recognized their commitment to the sect's causes. Congregated to document the Code of Milan, a collection of tenets that composed Sabbat ideology supposedly since the establishment of the sect, and additionally brought the code up to date in light of recent events. Yet again, the code proved too little too late, and after a few years Sabbat fell into a third civil war. This conflict lasted 100 nights in the later half of 1957. After the failed Brijah Antitribu coup, the clan rised against the now united Lasombra and Tzimisce clans, and out of the conflict a unified group of caitiff led by Joseph Panders and supported by the Brijah Antitribu affected the end of war. Lasombra and Tzimisce recognized the group Panders, named by their leader, as a distinct entity. With the mob appeased, the sect narrowly avoided another crippling setback. Some say that the Sabbat has matured remarkably in the intervening years. In the modern Knights, it has become a force to be reckoned with, claiming and reclaiming cities long held by the Camarilla with brutal efficiency. This singularity of vision seemed to overcome at least a modicum of sect's disorganization, and being that the sect is younger and more nimble than the Camarilla, it has been able to adapt to the ways of the modern world more quickly. Not surprisingly, the Sabbat exercises great influence over the Third World nations, ruling with impunity and building their own private empires. In the modernized parts of the world, Sabbat suffers limited influence in comparison to the Camarilla, whose influence in many human institutions prevents Sabbat from spreading with ease. While scorning the masquerade, Sabbat's leadership realizes that the threat of organized and technologically advanced human resistance is too dangerous to provoke. Thus, in Europe and North America, Sabbat takes some pains to cover its tracks, though far cruder than the subtle machinations of the Camarilla. The Sabbat may have fewer members than the Camarilla, but is far more cosmopolitan, at least with regard to lineage and those who make up its ranks. Sabbat prides itself on the universal vision of its vampires. Until recently, Lasombra and Tzimisce were the most numerous vampires of the sect, but the ratio is no longer stacked as it used to be. The clans of the Sabbat often refer to themselves as Antitribu or Anti-Clan. Having turned on their parent clans, there is little love between them and their mainstream counterparts. They parted ways long time ago, and while the details of old rivalries have been lost in the mists of history, now there is only hostility. Clan Lasombra is without a doubt the dominant clan in the Sabbat. It claims a history of nobility and prestige, though in the modern nights it would seem that the Sabbat has twisted nobility into the blackest of mockeries. Lasombra are jaded, depraved leaders, tempered by their own inner darkness and centuries of ruthless plotting and counter-plotting. The Sabbat would likely crumble without the leadership of Clan Lasombra, which claims to have destroyed its progenitor and would lead others to the selfsame victory. Eldritch and alien, the Tzimisce are a senescent clan of rotting prominence. Much of the Sabbat's monstrous outlook stems from Tzimisce philosophy and subsequent influence. The Fiends claim a proud history of rulership in the old world with iron talons and horrid magic. They possess a twisted honor and a malignant love of knowledge. Many sects' priests and counselors hail from Clan Tzimisce, and they represent the moral and spiritual backbone of the Sabbat. It is whispered that the legendary Dracula claims this clan as his own, although the facts are unknown, or even the fact if he exists at all. The Sabbat Assamites are much like their independent brethren. They inhabit a comfortable niche among the bloody Sabbat, given that they are free to murder and diabolarize. Most members of this clan join the subsect known as the Black Hand, or become Templars, Paladins, and other enforcers of the Sabbat policy. Surprisingly, the clan seems to maintain a fairly civil relationship with their parent clan, despite its heretical beliefs in the Sabbat Nodist philosophy. Sabbat Assamites also have never succumbed to the curse only recently broken by the non-Sabbat assassins. A strange bloodline of vampires, blood brothers rather than embraced, they are created by the thaumaturgical and other mystical means. They often find themselves serving as muscle or labor for other vampires in the sect. Blood brothers move in circles that consist only of blood brothers, and their bizarre biothaumaturgical embrace strips them of personal will. Additionally, they undergo a flesh crafting process during the embrace that reforms their facial and physical structures to resemble one another exactly. They are employed by the freakish Tzimisce and scheming Lasombra, who use them when they need graceless work done, with which they would rather not associate themselves. Superficially similar to their parent clan, the Sabbat Bruja are ironically much more conservative than the mainstream clan. They are the pillars of stability for the Sabbat, as they are less for causes and more for wanton violence. Many of Sabbat's cannon fodder and shock troops come from this clan, as their prowess is matched only by their relentless support of the sect. The Sabbat Bruja are great proselytizers, as they convert everyone they can with the promises of freedom and the destruction of elders and their tyranny. Unlike their parent clan, they don't seem to despise the sect to which they belong. Very little can be said about the Sabbat Gangrel as a clan, as their ranks include loners and individualists who would seem to have little use for sects. The clan has two subdivisions, known as the City Gangrel and Country Gangrel. Country Gangrel are mostly like their parent clan, feral and rustic, preferring their own company. City Gangrel, however, seem to exhibit a more pack mentality, and resemble the creatures of urban nightmare more than their cousins, as their after-frenzy mutations resemble the features of the creatures that dwell in and around the populated areas, like vultures, insects, and creatures. This rare and curious vampires have joined the Sabbat only recently, and before that nobody has heard of them. They present themselves as quiet and conservative, preferring to traffic with the souls of the dead rather than rampaging on the streets. Nonetheless, they are cold and alien, conducting murder and torture in their laboratories. All Harbingers physically resemble the corpses, with skin so stretched that gives them skeletal and emaciated appearance. Some vampires attribute a dark origin to the Harbingers, as their knowledge and power is far more superior than any other clan that has appeared recently. The enigmatic and elusive Kiasyd seem to have very little, if any, affiliation with the Sabbat. But for whatever reason, they sympathize with the sect. Some of those who have heard of them believe that they have some mystical connection with the Lasombra, since tangible darkness trails the Kiasyd as it does the Keepers. But for the most part, Kiasyd seem to be content with remaining quietly distant from the affairs of the sect, losing themselves in the ancient writings and forgotten lore. Those few who venture outside would certainly be memorable, given that these vampires have bluish skin, pointed ears, tall frames, and pure black eyes. The Malkavians of the Sabbat support the clan only nominally, though they form one of the more populous clans. It would seem that their crippling derangements hinder any attempts of lucidity, as they are true monsters, rarely driven by anything other than ravenous hunger and rampaging beast. They are often restrained or incapacitated by their Sabbat members, as they are likely to maim friend and foe. In their rare moments of civility, they exhibit their cursed insight, often speaking in riddles and cryptic sentences that would seem only to have meaning to other members of the clan. Nosferatu in the Sabbat are studies in extremes, as among their ranks there are some of the most depraved villains and most humanitarian penitents. But however they appear to the rest of the clans within the Sabbat, they are too useful to the sect to be written off. Sabbat Nosferatu have some of the most ardent followers of the Sabbat's path of enlightenment, often forming packs that consist only of other Nosferatu and gather in secret like their Camarilla forebears. In fact, Nosferatu Antitribu maintain probably the best relationship with their mainstream clan than any other in Sabbat, and also know more about the Camarilla than any other Sabbat clan. Although they are not a true clan, Panders have accumulated some small degree of status in the Sabbat. The Panders comprise of cast-offs, and they are Sabbat's caitiff, but unlike caitiff, the Panders are acknowledged as equals, at least in theory if not in practice. Sabbat Ravnos have completely turned their backs on their gypsy heritage and no longer maintain any relation with their mainstream clan. They are some of the wildest vampires in the sect, and their wicked ways have made them even more malicious than the independent Ravnos. Almost all Ravnos Antitribu are Giorgio or non-gypsy. In turning away from their parent clan, they have also turned from their archaic ways. Many Ravnos Antitribu serve as scouts and spies for the Sabbat, taking advantage of their nomadic nature and prowess with chemistry. A recent development in Sabbat history has seen the conversion of a member of reviled Salubri bloodline to the Black Hand. Bringing and embracing a small elite army of followers, this Salubri declared a personal vendetta against the Camarilla, claiming that she has sheltered murderers and kinslayers since its conception. While Sabbat seemed like a strange place for them, their allegiance with the sect begins and ends with the war on the Camarilla. Salubri Antitribu have turned utterly away from the clan that spawned them, considering them weak and destined to disappear. It is believed that the Serpents of the Light began as a heretical offshoot bloodline of the followers of Seth, following more closely to the tenets of Vodun than the arcane Egyptian faith of their parent clan. At the urging of the Sabbat in 1960s, they left the fold, and they considered the Sethites' attempts to resurrect their undead vampire god blasphemous and foolish, as doing so would open the door to Gehenna and rouse the other antediluvians. Their opposition to their forebears' support of their antediluvian is met with ferocity not found elsewhere. These vampires embody all that is despicable and inhumane in the Sabbat and Toreador alike. Whereas Camarilla Toreadors become engrossed in beauty, Toreador Antitribu find human suffering, pain, and cruelty beautiful. They are truly depraved, taking pleasure in the torment of others and reveling in the gore. Some believe them to be more insane than the Malkavians, claiming that the perverts are interested only in suffering for its own sake, rather than any specific end. Like their counterparts in the Camarilla, Sabbat Toreador make up the high society of the sect, though their society is malefic and bloody. The Ventru of the Sabbat resemble their parent clan of nights past, and they truly loathe what the mainstream clan has become. While Camarilla Ventru are powerful finance and corporate princes, the Sabbat Ventru are paladins and knights, sworn to uphold the Sabbat's way of unlife and atone for the greed of their predecessors. They possess a grim nobility, and many find places within the Black Hand or as Templars. The Sabbat Inquisition is composed predominantly of Ventru Antitribu. Some would ironically say that Sabbat Ventru are some of the sect's most ardent supporters. Although it might be difficult to discern from the outside, the Sabbat actually has a codified hierarchy like any other war effort. While Sabbat and Camarilla are in war with each other, they are not in constant struggle every night, fighting on the streets for their survival. Therefore, the war effort is used to describe the state between these two sects. In fact, cities controlled by the Sabbat can hardly be distinguished from those ruled by the Camarilla. Apart from higher crime rates, more missing person cases, and general lesser quality and standard of human life, the cities are the same as any other. The Sabbat is not ruled so much as it is led. The higher echelons tend to lose touch with the younger vampires who are fighting on the streets, and at the lower tiers of hierarchy the leadership has a fluctuating nature. In the end, the Sabbat's fervent support of its cause proves its undoing, as the sect sworn to uphold freedom is prevented from achieving consistent success. Sabbat has created for itself a rough organization to delineate responsibilities and serve in its best interests. In theory, this organization provides a strong base for sect leadership as skilled vampires claw and plot their way to prominence. In practice, however, the model breaks down as elder vampires demand anachronistic subservience from Cainettes below them, and younger vampires openly rebel against their leaders. The Sabbat is perhaps its own greatest enemy, with many battles fought in heart and minds of the sect's members. The Regent of the Sabbat coordinates the grand-scale master plan of the sect. He is supported by a consistory of other powerful vampires, but the Regent holds little sway over the sect as a whole. Many younger vampires make a big show of rejecting his authority, and elder Sabbat flout his rule for their own personal gain. The Regent may demand service, fealty, and respect, but he must be able to back up his claim, as there is no lack of vampires ready to usurp the position for themselves. The Regent's nightly affairs consist primarily on entertaining sect luminaries, hearing progress reports, plotting against other vampires, and deciding which tactical and strategic maneuvers to make. Add to this numerous rituals, intrigues, and the fact that he needs to watch his back every step of the way. The current regent of the Sabbat is Melinda Galbraith, who presides in Mexico City. She is a member of Toreador Antitribu, and she draws much fire from her consistory members, as she is more involved in petty affairs of the sect than Sabbat's larger purpose. Leaders of individual pacts, Ducti, attend to the operation matters of their charges. The title is largely honorific, but some authority accompanies the title. Ductus is most often the most accomplished member of the pack, and he relies more on presence and force of personality to motivate his pack. Also, Ductus works closely with pack priests to grow his influence within the pack and the sect. Ductus call Esbats, which are pack's weekly meetings, where the priest conducts the most important riti and Ductus assigns duties to pack members. Ductus is often the most experienced and/or powerful vampire in the pack, and his authority is based on his ability to lead and manage his members, rather than the authority that comes from his title. As with any other vampire in the Sabbat, if he doesn't back up his position or is disliked by other member, he will quickly be removed. Pack priest is responsible for the spiritual well-being of his pack. Most priests are Tzimisce, but any clan can become a pack priest. Priest is second in command to the Ductus, and he officiates all riti observed by the pack, which creates great bonds of loyalty between each other and an identity of the pack. Every pack has a priest, and larger packs may have more than one. In the event of Ductus removal for whatever reason, the priest becomes a pack leader pro term until a new Ductus is assigned. Pack priests carry tremendous responsibility on their shoulders, as they must keep their packmates from succumbing to infernalism and from letting their beast rise to uncontrollability. Priests most often have abandoned their humanity, adopting some path, and they also encourage the journey of their packmates. Also known as paladins, the Templars are an elite force of bodyguards appointed by the bishop or greater leader. Although they have no formal organization, being named a Templar is a great honor for the Cainite so titled. It is a symbol of strength in the Sabbat and a public acknowledgement of one's fighting skills. Templars serve a variety of duties, but always in martial capacity. They are in the employ of the sect leaders, serving as a judicious application of violence or as a muscle for the inquisitors on their travels and trials. Templars are forbidden from becoming members of the Black Hand, as it is seen as a conflict of interest. Sometimes they are referred to as bloodhounds or button men by other Cainites, as they are most often enforcers of the sect's leaders. As its history illustrates, Sabbat is hardly a unified entity. The sect is home to numerous splinter groups and factions of vampires who have united under the banner of the Sabbat to achieve their own ends or direct the greater body of the sect. Not all Sabbat vampires are members of these factions, but these factions claim a great number of members and have become an integral part of the existence of the Sabbat itself. The Black Hand is best described as a sect within a sect, but is not wholly independent sect, as all its members are loyal to the Sabbat. The Black Hand consists of many vampire clans, but most of its members predominantly come from the Assamite and Gangrel Antitribu. Most of the vampires from this group are militant, whose concern with their clan is secondary to their pursuit of Sabbat's ideal of freedom. Many members of the Black Hand are dispersed among the other vampires of the Sabbat, and all hand packs are very rare. Conceived as a special militia, the Black Hand is a military force at the disposal of Sabbat's leaders. It specializes in numerous aspects of warfare, ranging from intrigue, intelligence to assassination, and outright physical combat. Black Hand rarely acts as a whole, but is rather split into small focused cells that attend to the issues at hand. Sabbat elders prefer this arrangement, as some secretly fear an attempt of coup if the whole hand stays active for too long. Sabbat leaders commonly activate the Black Hand for leading assault or sieges on Camarilla cities. The Black Hand includes many of the deadliest Cainites on Earth, and they specialize in terror tactics and breaking the masquerade. The presence of the Hand is grave and not subtle, so their assistance is not called lightly, as their aid is considered as bringing out the big guns. Any Cainite with a title of bishop or greater may call the Hand's assistance, and most Hand members are able to request an aid from other members of the faction. Membership in the Black Hand is a matter of much prestige among the Sabbat, and its members are selected on individual basis. The Hand candidates are tested with rigorous trials and ordeals to test the vampire's endurance, strength, willpower, cunning, and martial ability. If the candidate passes, he is assigned a mentor who instructs him in the ways of the Black Hand. Members of the Black Hand bear a distinguishing mark in the form of a mystical sigil on the palm of their right hand that the faction brands its members permanently. The brand may be concealed, but it may never be removed. Once the vampire receives this mark, he becomes a true member of the Black Hand and must heed to group's calls whenever he receives it. Membership in the Black Hand lasts until final death. A group of vampires called the Seraphim acts as a high military council of the faction. These 4 Seraphim answer directly to the Regent and are known to join the consistory during the times of war. Below the Seraphim are the Dominions, who organize individual regiments of Black Hand warriors, and below Dominions are other ranks who conduct most of the actual operations of the faction. Many Sabbat credit the Black Hand with the cohesion of the sect through the difficult times, as the Hand remained solvent during the Sabbat civil wars, enabling the sect to maintain influence in the cities that would have otherwise fallen to the Camarilla. Taking cue from the mortal Spanish Inquisition, the Sabbat Inquisition is a political faction charged with rooting out heretics and infernalists. Originally established to combat the followers of the path of evil revelations who have hidden themselves inside the Sabbat, the Inquisition has met with tremendous success in the past few years, and as a direct result it has doubled in number. Of course, the Inquisition resembles its mortal counterpart in other ways as well. The Inquisition has acquired quite a reputation for cruelty, stemming from their interrogation and punishment methods. Any Sabbat member accused of infernalism can expect to be branded, beaten, and tortured, and if he admits to or is proven guilty of infernalism, he receives long, slow, and painful final death. Many inquisitors take twisted pleasure in delivering pain and death to their victims. They have brusque, harsh demeanors and are almost always regarded with respectful fear, as all Cainites' unlives rest in the hands of these stalwart individuals. The Sabbat Inquisition is a political entity as well, in that it possesses the power to depose bishops, archbishops, pack priests, and ducti. A rumored antagonism exists between the Inquisition and the Black Hand, and members of one faction have expressly forbidden membership in the other. The Loyalist Faction claims that it is the true legacy of the Sabbat, the ones who shook the yoke of their elders and grabbed freedom from themselves. The Loyalist philosophy is simple: each vampire is his own master. They believe that they have freedom to do whatever they want, although they are not stupid enough to be so reckless to do something that would destroy them. However, their philosophy and behavior can be troublesome to other Cainites. Obviously, Loyalists have no organization or hierarchy of responsibility, and they are considered a faction only in the sense that there are numerous individuals who support this ideology. Other members of the Sabbat have little respect for Loyalists and tend to see them as anarchists, psychopaths, and spoiled children who want the benefits of the curse of Caine without the responsibilities. On the inside, Loyalists truly believe in their cause. They point fingers at elders and argue that the Knight no longer belongs to the Sabbat, that the sect has lost its meaning and power in these modern Knights, and that nothing much has changed since the Knights of the Anarch Revolt. Loyalists accept anyone into their ranks as they have no codes or secret rituals and they are largely composed of young Cainites. Obviously, they are fairly powerless in the larger picture of Sabbat politics, but their numbers continue to grow, and many elders make the mistake of dismissing them. Cautious Cainites see the potential they possess, pointing at the Panders as a recent example of what young Sabbat are capable of. There are many small factions that exist among the Sabbat. They come and go, some appear overnight and as equally disappear. As their name would suggest, they are satisfied with the things as they are. Made up of many great Lasombra, Tzimisce, and key members of the Black Hand, they accept the nature of vampires and know that change is almost impossible. The great jihad continues, for better or for worse, and any attempts to try to shake the foundations of Sabbat would only serve to distract it from its great goal. Status Quo supports the Sabbat's leadership, hierarchy, and its political direction. They point out to the recent success of Sabbat's war effort, which proves that things are happening as they should, and that no radical change is necessary. The Status Quo doesn't want to increase the authoritarianism of the sect, because that would only promote rebellion in the lower ranks. Many Sabbat leaders belong to the Status Quo, but these leaders are not tyrants and megalomaniacs of the sect. Rather, they are proven leaders who have attained their stations through merit. The moderates oppose what they see as increasing rigidity, intruding into the sect and limiting the rights of individual Sabbat for the good of a few. The faction rests somewhere in between loyalist dogma and status quo conservatism, acknowledging the need for order and structure, but not adherence to arbitrary codes that offer no benefit to offset their inconvenience. And while they usually follow orders, they do not hesitate to question those in charge if any order seems foolish or reckless. Most of the sect, if it cared to declare, would apathetically fall into the ranks of the moderates. Things are good enough, but they could be better. This faction has most diverse members of the sect, and it possesses a bit of a political clout, but the shifting allegiances of its members keep the faction as a relatively minor power. Predictably composed mostly of the eldest members of the Sabbat, ultra-conservatives favor centralization and authoritarianism, arguing that the time for freedom is over, as Gehenna looms around the corner. They favor strong leaders and advocate the removal of the weak through duels. The Black Hand seem to be slowly leaning toward support of the ultra-conservatives, but officially remains quiet in the issue. On the other hand, young Cainites see ultra-conservatives as fat old bastards that have more in common with the elders of the Camarilla than the Sabbat vampires. Originally a Christian belief from the time of the plague in the 14th century, St.Blaise was known for his healing abilities of throat melodies. Cainites within the church ironically found that those blessed throats would provide a sacred meal for vampires, and later they formed a secret monastic society. Members of the Order of St.Blaise lead dangerous lives, integrating themselves into the hierarchy of the Roman Catholic Church. Through careful manipulation of the church and their good works in the community, they help Sabbat in expanding its power and influence on the local level. In most Sabbat cities where murder, rape, and crime rates are very high, there is often an increased church attendance by the desperate mortals trying to find any salvation they can, and ironically putting themselves into the claws of the monsters of the night yet again. These devil worshippers and Satanists are not truly a faction within the Sabbat, but rather a sickness that plagues it. The practice of infernalism runs contrary to everything that Sabbat believes in, and the sect has had immense problems with infernalists in the past. However, it has created its own inquisition to combat it. Infernalists have no formal structure, as they rarely associate with one another. They serve themselves first and foremost, in a deceiving belief that they are taking a quick route to great power. The Infernalist is a lone conjurer, dealing with the devil only for his forbidden knowledge. However, the reality is far more than glamorous, as servitude annihilates freedom and free will. Sooner or later, the devil will literally come to collect his due, the Infernalist soul.